There's nothing better, and again, reaching over a handshake again, right? There's nothing better than just sitting down and sharing a glass of something or, a meal with somebody, right?
Breaking bread.
That's breaking bread, right? Like that's a core to who we are as a species, right? Who we are as people. There's something really important about that, and technology can't and will never replace that. Like, and I think we've seen that, like Zoom gets us close, it checks a box, but it doesn't do that.
Yep.
But you have to have the time to do that. You have to make the time.
That's the key right there.
To
you have
do
to make
that.
the time.
And if the demands of everything else eclipse that, are we using technology effectively?
Great businesses don't spring up out of nowhere. It takes grit, perseverance, personal growth, and failure to reach the status of an iconic local business. Welcome back to Season 6 of the Building Bellingham podcast, where we're bringing you 8 more stories of local leaders and how they are building Bellingham. Guy,
Yeah.
welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This is Season 6, Episode 5. We're going to be enjoying a nice little splash of whiskey, toasting to the 45th episode of Building Bellingham, and
Well,
I'm excited to have you on the
here.
show. You're a character.
I don't know if I'm a character.
Well, I mean this in a positive way.
I'm
got a
taking
lot.
a sip.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna roast you.
Mm-hmm.
No, you do a lot for Bellingham.
Well, thank you. I try.
You are the president and CEO for the Chamber of Commerce,
Correct.
the Bellingham Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Yep.
You're on a radio show. You're constantly putting on events through the chamber to connect local business owners. I know a lot of people know you,
Yeah.
and you know them as well.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit more about who you are, what you do, why Bellingham.
So the way you've led that in, it's one of my favorite sayings, or kind of a reframing of something that we hear a lot, right? Like in the business community, one of the things that the chamber does and is known for is networking, right? Whether it's through our networking breakfast, our handshakes and happy hours, our Whatcom Young Professionals, which your team has an active role in. It's that concept of it's who you know, right? Like we throw that around like candy in professional settings, and it's a lie. It's wrong. It's not who you know. It's who knows you, right? So you may know the president of the region's largest company, but if they don't know you, that's probably not that valuable for you, right? It's a symbiotic relationship. And one of the framing that I love to put in community development is this notion of us over I, right? So dad joke, what's in the middle of community? You and I, literally you and
Nice.
I, right? And I like this framework of us over I, and that's not us at the expense of I, right? That there's a synergy component to that, to say, let's rise all the boats together, which is kind of the nature of being a chamber. We can have multiple real estate firms, members of the chamber, multiple realtors, members of the chamber, multiple retailers, multiple insurance companies, a member of the chamber, because the whole idea is to make the community a little bit better, maybe more business to go around for everybody.
Right.
That's part of that ethos as to who am I? Like what do I bring to the table in my approach to do the work? And so, as you mentioned, the Bellingham Regional Chamber of Commerce it's actually a DBA at this moment in time, because filling out federal paperwork's fun. And so our legal name, as it's been for my best guess is 3 or 4 decades now, is the Bellingham Whatcom Chamber of Commerce and Industry. A lot of words, right?
It is.
First and foremost, Chamber of Commerce. Most people have an idea of what that is, but honestly, most people have no clue. Most people think it's like, oh, it's government. Like, nope. We are a separate nonprofit. And again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is the space between spaces, right? Like we're a problem solver. Like what issues do we need to fix? And again, especially from a business lens. And I think most of our businesses exist with this notion to be in a place to live, work, and play. And again, if you look at a lot of chambers everywhere across the country, you see that terminology to create a place to live. Because if you're an employer, You want your employees to be able to find living situation, which may be a topic we may talk about.
Yeah, what? Ouch.
Housing.
Yeah.
Live and work. You want opportunities. And then, of course, a place to play, which I think we do really well in Bellingham and Whatcom County.
We do.
And then the other aspect of that name, Bellingham Regional, is a number of years ago. And I think we still do this as a system, as a society, not necessarily an organization, but we play to this duality of it's either Bellingham or it's Whatcom County. I think that has not served us well as a system.
How so?
Because it sets us in competition. Like, why can't Bellingham succeed and Ferndale succeed and Blaine succeed and Mount Baker succeed? Like, we can all succeed together versus Bellingham succeeding at the expense of any of our other small communities or everybody else, or vice versa. And so I think when we frame that Bellingham Whatcom Chamber of Commerce, we're setting that tone, right? Why not just say, this is the Bellingham region, we're all in it together. You know, I personally live in Linden. I work, our office is downtown Bellingham. And if you're talking a little bit more about me, I've been with the Bellingham Chamber for just getting close to 11 years now. And then prior to that, I was the executive director of the Ferndale Chamber for 7.5 years. So there's still a big chunk of my heart that's with the Ferndale community, right? So getting this unique perspective and lens to say there's so much value in diversity across the board, all kinds of diversity. So why not set a table of success for everyone? So we don't need to play to the differences. Let's play to the similarities and the complement and the supplemental aspects of community.
That makes sense. And it's been around for 130 years.
It has.
So nothing's changed, right?
Not at all.
But there have been some consistency, which small business has been a consistent.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Tell me a little bit more about, we don't need to get into the full history lesson, but the progression of Bellingham over these years. What's changed in the last 11 years since you've been here versus things that you've learned about Bellingham prior to you stepping into this role? Gosh,
there's a term. I mean, part of what a chamber of commerce does is economic development, right? And you could say business development, and that's that individual, that's networking, right? Be like, oh, hey, someone needs to buy a house. I know somebody that can help with that, right? That business development, making businesses better. Economic development is generally thought of as bigger infrastructure-oriented things. We might think of my rudimentary kind of definition of economic development is more better jobs. That's good for a community, I feel. Not everyone agrees. I don't know why they wouldn't, but just honoring that there are other opinions out there. Understanding that economic development is important for communities. One of our colleagues locally, and he told me this years ago, is economic development is measured in decades, which is so true. Like when we look at these big iconic projects in our community that take forever.
Are you referring to any specific projects?
No. I mean, there's a couple that can come to mind, like
right.
when we think the waterfront project. And it's designed to, right? Like as it was proposed almost 10 years ago, like they knew 2040 something was going to be the kind of end of that proposal.
Right.
Right? Like they were planning decades long. And even that's a little bit more infrastructure related. I think you can look at the investment in the airport. That was about 12 years ago now, I think. And even that's almost exclusively government, whereas the waterfront is really public-private, right? It's not just government, but a lot of big infrastructure pieces have to be government. And there are plenty of stories and potential projects that get spun up and talked about. And maybe we'll do this, and maybe it fades away into something else.
Lots of dreamers, right?
Lots of dreamers, and that's okay. I would like if we were all on the same page about those dreams and see through some of them.
Yeah.
And sometimes, things happen and things change. I think, as we're entering 2025 and understanding how the world is different in a post-pandemic environment. We've been talking about this for a couple of years, and I'm
Right.
kind of talking, but like tired of saying post-pandemic environment. But the dust, I think, has finally settled enough to where we can say, okay, we're resetting what normal looks like. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody and referencing this little data set. It's one of my, it's if probably my favorite data set that comes from the pandemic, because it's not like health and like, it's not the negative aspects that came from the pandemic. It's about business investment. And I can't remember if it was global business investment or just national business investment. So I'd have to go back and research. But the amount of business investment between April of 2020, so a month into the pandemic, when everybody was like, oh, hey, guess we need to invest in webcams now,
Yeah.
right? Webcams and Zoom, right? To August of 2020. So that 4-month time period, the level of business investment increase in those 4 months would take the previous 19 years to equate,
Wow.
right? So if we're trying to compare apples to apples, the experience in February of 2020 versus the experience of doing business in August of 2020 was about the same difference between February 2020 and 2001.
Wow.
So I was just old enough or just young enough to be in the workforce in 2001 to understand what work looked like. The email was still a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't have smartphones like these old school things called PDAs or
Bricks.
you know,
The
yeah,
Nokia bricks.
exactly.
Well, and the world didn't crash in 2000.
Well, there's that too. Like, I'm not even referencing the 2001 like economic pieces. I'm just going 19 years before.
Right.
Right? But we do things so differently even in early 2020 prior to the pandemic compared to 2001, right? Like that work environment was just different. And then we made that same leap in business investment. Like I think of, the tools that we're talking on right now.
They're not real mics. They're just brooms with.
Well, I'm
fluffy-
looking at the name brand on them, and
Yeah.
it's a good quality name brand. There's a business investment there, and how businesses do business has changed.
Right.
And so I think with that dust settling far enough away from the pandemic at this point, where we're realizing what norms look like. And so when you frame that on community, and especially community that, I like telling everyone in the heart of Bellingham, right? Where we are, your office is essentially close enough to downtown to say the heart of Bellingham.
No, this is the central point of Bellingham.
Yeah, exactly.
Our office is, just for everyone listening, that the Bellingham Real Estate Company office and the podcast studio is the center of Bellingham.
Exactly. Done.
Everything else revolves around us.
Yeah, and there's 8 million humans that call home 90 minutes in a car from right here. And 1/27th of them call Whatcom County home. And we have seen the impact of remote work in the last 5 years impact our community and those demands and the things that it creates too, right? Like connection opportunities from loneliness to competitive against employees, right? But like, oh, it's harder to find an employee now as a local company because you're competing with remote work opportunities, right? And so when you look at economic development, as it looks like for local employers, it's a different game, right?
is.
And I don't want to gamify because it's not. Like it's sustainability of a business and an idea and a dream. It's just kind of really interesting to watch how things change. So your question was, how have I seen it change? That's one big way. And I was just here for it, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of like rode the wave of that change and watching how it's ebbed and flowed over time. And I have the opportunity to kind of like look back over the years. And I think our organization has been really impactful in the community over decades. I mentioned the airport and ironically enough, the waterfront, like both being Port of Bellingham projects, right? The chamber birthed the port. Port of Bellingham came out of the chamber in the 1920s. One of our, if not, I would say arguably the signature event, and I hate to use that terminology because the city of Bellingham has a signature event grant, so I don't want to diminish the other signature event recipients, but Ski to Sea, right? Pretty synonymous with our community. We started that in the 60s. And so when I talk about our opportunity as an organization is to say, where are we? Where and what are we right now? And what do we need to drive business success and community success to the next level? So it's really an evaluation of what are the pain points and what are the opportunities, right?
And there's a lot of both.
There's a lot of both. And providing opportunities for business development success, making sure that young professionals have a place to engage and meet and network, making sure that our business community has networking opportunities, education opportunities. And one of the things that takes most of my time is just engaging with our local governments, right? And making sure that they understand, maybe not agree with or empathize, but at least understand the needs of the business community.
Well, for those that are listening, knowing that you have a long track record of being able to do that, whether you disagree or agree with local government, you at least know how to communicate. And I think what I've seen a lot of is maybe just misunderstandings of how the government works, and also maybe a stone wall of just, instead of getting so worked about it, maybe just there are avenues for people to go and communicate with the local government.
Yeah.
What's some advice that you might pass along to your citizen here in Bellingham that's like, I will not stand for this, but they won't do anything to change it?
Right.
What is the best way to communicate with a local government official that's not inflammatory, that just is actually focused on moving forward?
Sure. I think the best way to do that, because most of the time people have a talking point, a pain point, an issue, right?
Right.
I was taught ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? I also think that we need an overhaul of our civics education in this country. Similar pain point, and we have an opportunity, right? And so I'm really excited about the potential to bring what's called the National Civics Bee to our community, to build in, I think, middle school civics education, right? I think there needs to be civics education throughout the school system, and that's the place to do it. But if you're talking about an adult in the community that has a pain point on a particular issue, I think understanding what the rules are, and we have really complicated rules, and most of our elected officials and government staff won't want to hear this, but sometimes our rules oppose each other. Right. And I think when you look at, the building, especially commercial real estate, you may have building codes that are out of alignment with fire code. How do you navigate that? Right. And when in a business community, and for the most part, we are to some degree natural resource oriented economies, but most of the employees, most of the businesses that exist are no longer natural resources or raw materials. It's service, right? And when you're a service-based business, most of your expenses is in that payroll line. So literally time is money. And so when you have your government systems that are not working efficiently, at least from that perspective of that person trying to get that application or that permit.
Yeah. And stuck in some sort of maze.
Exactly. Right. Like time is money, and you want to talk about why things cost so much. Well, there's one reason. I'm a big believer in you have two ears, one mouth, use them in that proportion, or at least try to. Try to understand what the pain point is, what the issue is, what the rules are. One of the things that I find a lot when people have a legitimate complaint about usually a process is they don't understand how the process happened or what the process is. Part of that's just the nature of being a rule-based society. Right? A lot of rules to know. No one human can know them all. So we have access, and it's really easy to access any of the rules, any of the laws that exist. Our government systems do a really good job of having that there and readily available, whether you agree with it or whether it's just or whether it's valid or right anymore. And this goes back into society moves and changes.
And some rules stay there that don't necessarily apply.
Exactly.
All right, I want to shift directions a little bit towards connection.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of what you guys do.
Yep.
Whenever the interwebs became the way that we lived.
Yeah.
It was all connection in person for the most part. I mean, with phones, obviously. But then technology stepped into the picture, and then I think everyone got really wrapped up especially COVID accelerated that. But I think a lot of people during COVID, it was like, great, we have these ways to connect online. And I don't know if you feel this too, but I'm totally burnt out from Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're in a place now where we're all coming back to going, I'm so spammed on my phone. I have no idea what's happening there. I want to let's get together in person and grab a coffee or something.
Yep.
What are you seeing with you guys as a platform for people to connect? How have you seen that change?
Oh, there's a lot of... So let's talk at the high level, and then we'll kind of... I just took a sip.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure you wet the whistle a little bit there. And
and I'm enjoying the fumes.
They're there.
Exactly. Something like that. Kind of leaning back to my earlier topic about the business world did things different in 2001 and then kind of, moving along through the decades. I think of the 2008 financial crisis. And this is when I noticed it. And maybe I was just competent enough as an adult, a very young professional at that point in time, to recognize the changes, right? It wasn't like entering the work world and everything's new and you don't have a baseline. I had a baseline. For me, and I think for so many other businesses, what happened post 2008 is everybody, employee, business owner, businesses as an entity, right? Mm-hmm. Recognizing those are different things. Everybody had to do more with less. So think of, and this is kind of how technology embeds that, right? Like if we think about it, like, oh, hey, Zoom and remote work and email on your phone.
I wish it wasn't there.
Sometimes, right? But from a productivity standpoint, which is why we have technology. Technology is there to make our lives easier, not necessarily to make our lives more. I have this photo on the wall in my office. I have a couple photos for very specific reasons. One is from 1920s, and it's at what we call Hotel Leo now, Hotel Leopold at that point. It's a room full of 1920s professionals. They are all white, and there's only like 8 ladies out of about 120 people. And so first and foremost, we can't ever look like that again. We have to be more diverse. We get to be more diverse, and we should be. So first and foremost, that is that reminder of be who you want to be and don't be who you don't want to be, right? But when I think about those individuals, I'm going to pick one random human out of that room. What business looked like 100 years ago probably was 2, let's say humans, having a lunch meeting, coming up with a contract.
On a napkin, on a little scratch pad, whatever, go back to the office.
There's a secretary there that probably drafts up the contract. Everyone proofreads it. You put it in the mail. A couple days later, it arrives at the other place. Maybe if you had the money, you did a courier, but you probably dropped it into the mail. They review it. They sign it. They drop it back into the mail. And then what is now maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks of a process, we do now in a matter of moments. Right? DocuSign that thing. Done.
Yeah.
Right? Recognize real estate industries there's a lot of paperwork there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not every industry has that, right?
But it is certainly, even from when I started, it is certainly easier.
Yeah.
Like a lot easier.
Well, just like the online piece, right? Like this goes back to digital tools. So if we think about productivity and framing it from that way, you took a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks of multiple people being involved in this transaction, and you just shrunk it down to, let's round up and say an hour. Do we have a week and a half minus an hour of vacation? Or
I wish.
In theory, technology should have generated that, but it didn't. And speaking back to, old television, like most people remember this I Love Lucy. There's a sitcom, or I guess, and there's this iconic scene where Lucy and I think a friend or something are working like a chocolate conveyor belt, and they're like stuffing it in because they can't move that fast. And I think that's the reality that we're faced with now in these couple of different systemic shifts that have happened over the last primarily 20 years. But technology has sped up, and our ability as humans to keep up is not there. And so this is really interesting how AI will come into this and maybe alter some of that. So the speed of business has changed, even in my 20 years. And I have to think of 130 years of this entity, very different, right? Just the speed at which you do things is just so vastly different. And I think the volume per person has drastically increased. Like, people are expected to do more with less. And one of the things, and I don't have a good assessment, I think it's so industry specific. Again, looking at that business investment that came out of the pandemic, and in that, what I'm calling an overcompensation, right? Like, I'm tired of Zoom too, but there are a couple things that Zoom works really well for.
Oh, yeah.
I think what we're experiencing now is that overcompensation. So think of a pendulum swing. Like, we had to go all Zoom there for so long, and now there's this like push to like, I don't want to go and Zoom anymore. I'm burnt out on it.
But I'll still use it.
But I'll still use it
because
it's convenient. And so I ultimately think that we're going to come to some sort of evening out of that. And I don't know what that looks like, but framing it to the technology that we had in a business world in 2001 or 1920 something, Zoom is one more tool in the tool belt. Right. This is still iconic.
Oh, you have a handshake where you point.
I do. Yeah.
I noticed that. Is
I'll
that
go-
like a hey you?
No, it's not.
Is
But
that like a signature handshake?
sure.
Huh.
Do you want me to tell the psychology behind it?
Sure.
Do it again.
Yes, I will do whatever you want me to do.
Sure. Great. So there's two pieces here.
Yeah.
Right. And no one take this. This is mine. I learned it from somebody. So first and foremost, I am reaching under.
Okay.
I'm giving you the literal upper hand.
Okay.
I'm also, and again, for people that can't see it, I'm putting my finger, and I've got big hands, so it helps.
You do have big hands.
And so
I feel like a
do
like
you
a
feel
baby.
supported?
I feel supported.
You feel supported, and you have the upper hand.
Yeah.
So what does that tell you emotionally, psychologically with me?
That you're here to support me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and this is you. This the finger pointing is because,
It's nothing. It's not a finger point. It's a support.
Oh, gotcha.
It's, if you're lifting someone up, you ever lifted someone up that's on the ground? Like, if you do this, you're both hurting, but if you grab your wrists, it's a lot more supportive.
It's like the gladiator handshake.
It's like the gladiator
it's like
handshake.
You grab him on the wrist.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if
And
you're
so,
shaking Brandon Nelson's hand, it's
Dude.
your hand.
Yeah.
He's got swimmer hands.
he does.
Yeah.
Kayak hands.
Kayak hands. Yeah.
It's both. I don't know. So yeah, I think it's one more tool in the tool belt. This will always be iconic business, is the handshake. It's just one more thing that we get to learn, that we get to use, that we have to be proficient on. Like, when we have teammates and colleagues and coworkers and employees, it's like, okay, we have to have Zoom etiquette and Zoom training, as well as phone etiquette and email etiquette and social media etiquette.
And Zoom etiquette's just you have to wear a shirt and tie, but you don't have to wear anything down below, right?
You do you, sir.
Whatever,
You do you.
you know? A while back, I had Doc Swinson's for the first time, and it quickly became my go-to whiskey. In season 5 of the show, I sat down with Jesse Parker, the master blender, and heard about the development of both the whiskey and their business. We connected so much that I just had to ask him about being our community partner for this season. Doc Swinson's is produced right here in Ferndale, Washington, and is available for sale at Hagen. I'm a big bourbon guy, so my personal favorite is any of their bourbons, whether they're aged in port cask or just straight bourbon. You can't go wrong. They make award-winning whiskey, but more importantly, they're just awesome people, and we really appreciate them. So I want to go back to something you said that it's been spinning in my head a little bit, which is technology. The intention of technology was to make things easier. It wasn't necessarily to do more. Did I quote that right? It was like it was there to create more efficiency.
Yeah. Yes.
But then all of a sudden, all we've done is filled the time that's left over from being more efficient with being forced to do more, or feeling like we have to do more. Do you feel like there's a?
I think my sentiment spot on. Whether forced to, expected to, whether that's an employer be like
circumstantial.
Yeah, be like, you're working 40 hours. I really mean 60 hours, which that's really interesting. Like, when you look at a workforce crisis, like we're functionally out of humans for the number of jobs that are available. And especially when you look at growing industries, like, we don't have enough human bodies to do the work that needs to be done.
Where are they?
Oh, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
I mean, first and foremost, housing crisis. We don't have enough housing here or anywhere in the country right now. I think another piece is birth rate. There are other people in the community that can certainly speak to birth rate implications on a society much more than I can. But that's something that I'm really cognizant of as even big systems. Like, this is bigger than just a Bellingham, Whatcom County. Like, this is a national issue. Maybe not a global issue per se, but definitely a national issue. I think when we look at solving the workforce crisis, and again, I'm not going to get political on the show, but like, immigration is a really interesting conversation when we look at business success and growing the business community, which you kind of need employees to do. And again, yes, there's the whole AI component. And again, that's going to kind of dovetail us back into, what's technology's role? Like, is it easier to dig a hole with your hand, a little trowel or shovel, or a backhoe? Well, it depends on the size of the hole.
Depends on how much character you want to build,
Does it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
More character, less technology.
So they say.
So they say.
It's a different kind of character.
So my dad says.
Right. I think my dad went to that same school. We have to right-size technology. We have to use technology. It goes back, like, different tool in the tool belt, right? Like, if you're trying to hammer a nail, you might not grab a screwdriver to do that. It might work. It takes some time. It's not the best tool to use, but you might be able to get it done. If you're putting a fence up, you want to dig a post, do you grab a backhoe? I mean, you could. It's way more tool than you need for that. So part of it is the understanding what tools do what and when to use each tool. So part of that's an educational piece. But I think that's what, like, when we look at us as humans, right? Like, our ability to use and create tools are one of the really interesting things about us as a species, right? If it's not to make things more productive or efficient, it should certainly be there to make things better.
Or more fun.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to get to fun, but yes, depending on the tool. So, yeah, I think it's a case-by-case basis. I think we have utilized technology to speed up production to a point that may not be humanly sustainable, right? And I think that's when you look at burnout and everybody's like work-life balance and work-life demands. Even if we're going back to, like, there's nothing better, and again, reaching over a handshake again, right? There's nothing better than just sitting down and sharing a glass of something or, a meal with somebody, right? Like, that's breaking bread, right? Like, that's a core to who we are as a species, right? Who we are as people. There's something really important about that, and technology can't and will never replace that. Like, and I think we've seen that, like, Zoom gets us close, it checks a box, but it doesn't do that.
Yeah.
But you have to have the time to do that. You have to make the time.
That's the key right there.
To do that.
The time.
And if the demands of everything else eclipse that, are we using technology effectively?
That was deep.
That was deep.
That was
yeah.
awesome.
Lot more than
that
I have to deal with on a regular basis, right? Like, one of the unique things, and getting back to, if, like, I am doing the 60-second elevator speech of, like, why should you participate and engage with the Bellingham Regional Chamber of Commerce, right? I think of it, we have 3 buckets that we work in. First, advocate, right? We advocate for our business community and our broader community at large, right? To create a place to live, learn, work, and play. I added learn because I believe learning is a core tenet into who we are as business people, as humans. We have to constantly learn. We have to learn new technology, right? We have to learn new...
Even if it's begrudgingly.
Even if it's begrudgingly, right? Like, we get to constantly improve ourselves, and we should want to do that because business is built on innovation, and innovation is built on learning. So, advocate. And a lot of that is a case-by-case basis, which is why it takes so long. The second piece is connection. And... again, reaching over that simple handshake, right? That spark of connection. Most of the time in the business world, we call it networking. And sometimes we do that through our networking breakfast. Again, our handshakes happy hour, which is kind of a after hours thing. We've got our Whatcom Young Professionals program, which has a number of different networking opportunities for younger professionals in the community. And then there's just other things that we do that are kind of maybe one-off, maybe annual events, maybe regular things that happen. And I often say that every time the chamber meets is a chance to network, is a chance to build relationship, is a chance to meet somebody you haven't met before. And then the third thing is cultivation. And this is this newer, again, term that our board has kind of identified as something that we want to work on. And really that leans into creating better, right? Cultivating. And that's cultivating our business community and business success. And a big part of that as we look over the next 5 years, 10 years, is really cultivating our workforce, which is the people, right? Our community members, our employees in the community, and what their needs and pain points are as well. And there's also some, I would say, systematic workforce development programs that we could look at down the road too. Mm-hmm. So those are the three buckets that we tend to kind of function in.
Building Bellingham is a community production of the Bellingham Real Estate Company. We are an independent real estate firm located on Meridian Street. From our data-centric approach to a heavy investment in media and collaboration, we do real estate differently in Whatcom County. Check out Bellingham Real Estate Co reviews on Google, Zillow, and ratemyagent.com, and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.
Let's talk about pain points. I mean, you come across a lot of different business owners in different stages with different businesses.
Sure.
You know, a lot of them fit somewhere together on the same Venn diagram, which is they have a dream for creating some sort of value for the community, whether it's a widget or it's a service or whatever it is. What's a pain point that you see for a new business owner? What's a pain point you see for the emerging business owner? And what's a pain point you see for a, established business owner? Because there's always pain points.
Yes.
All the time.
All the time. That is a really difficult question, and here's why. Again, 20 years ago, I've used 20 years because that's when I started my chamber career in Whatcom County, right? So I think there's a lot of value in having that lens of saying, how has this county changed and ebbed and flowed over 20 years? Is historically, we talked about restaurant, retail, hospitality, bars, hotels, restaurant, we talked about that as one industry, right? Retail included. And again, this may be pandemic oriented. I think it was actually starting before that, is we're seeing separation, even within these clusters that we traditionally bound together. So if you're going to look at 2025 and let's compare a downtown restaurant to a retailer on the guide, those are different realities and different pain points. So 15 years ago, probably I would have said, oh yeah, the pain point is blah, 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 blah. Now I can't do that. Now you have to actually say, what are you talking about?
Yeah, what are all the factors?
What are the factors? Where are they located? What is their business? So I think that there are some pretty big, broad pain points that exist. One is housing, right? It's kind of you hear that concept of thin red line. Housing is that really thick red line, that marker, that giant Sharpie that we have got to solve. And it's impacting our ability to diversify our business community, because we can't bring in new businesses because they look here and look at the numbers, right? They come see you and say, great, I have to pay my employees how much to own a home here? Okay, if they're competing on a global market, there are much cheaper places to locate, right? So housing is that red line across so many pain points. Let's solve homelessness in our community. We need additional housing. We don't talk about housing the right way. We talk about affordable housing. I hate that word. And I don't like using the word hate often, but I will say I hate the concept, the definition, the lack thereof of affordable housing, because I call it the facial tissue of community policy building. What's affordable? Can anyone define what affordable housing is? We have working definitions related to the AMI, which is the average median income. So affordable housing means so many different things to different people. So I don't tend to play in that space. I crumble it up like that facial tissue that it is, because is it a Kleenex or is it a Puffs? Yeah. They're all Kleenex anymore. Yeah. but they're technically not.
Yeah.
Right? So affordable housing is that thing for me. Sorry for going down that little rabbit hole there.
That's a great rabbit hole. We can continue.
No, I want to talk about, I want to spend time on two other A words.
Okay.
About housing. Available housing. As a realtor, what is our months of inventory on the MLS right now?
Wild stab in the dark without looking at it right now, probably 2.5 months.
Yeah. It's
Is that right, Tiffany? She's looking it up right now.
But it's a data set the market measures.
Do you know what it was during COVID?
Well, it was like sub 1 for years.
It was like 2 weeks at the
Yeah.
worst point. It was 2 weeks of inventory.
Yeah, and we had that reality prior to the pandemic too.
Okay, so if 6 months is tipping point balance market, anything below that is technically a seller's market. We haven't seen anything above 6 months in ages
Ever.
and we're at 2 weeks, and people are like, oh god, I'll sell.
Yeah.
Or if they're buying, they're like, where are the houses, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
And so the market measures this. Why would we not adapt to policy that references what the market actually measures? This is one of my biggest pain points in policy work is we don't tether it to data or metrics, right? We're like, oh, let's create policy because it makes us feel good. Or we want to say no, right? That's how we use
more
policy.
subjective than objective.
Yes. Or it can be very objective and be like, no, like we're going to create policy to create no entry, right? Getting back to like, why do we have codes that are opposite each other, like are contradictory? Like that seems like an easy fix that if we were really worried about efficient and effective government, that seems like something that should happen. But it's not the reality. I'm a big believer in available housing. That should be the entry level as far as community success. Like, yes, we have available housing for you to relocate your business, for you to expand your business, for us to solve homelessness. We have available housing. Philosophy-wise, I love the concept of abundant housing. And that is like, when did abundant housing ever become a bad thing? Like, have enough. Like, yeah, it certainly impacts the price point of housing. And so I imagine our, real estate community would have some like we don't want to flood the market, right? We don't want to decrease value across the board. And yet there are other tools. Like, have you stayed in an Airbnb ever?
No. Yes.
You
Maybe.
have
Just
stayed.
kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Did you check to see if that Airbnb was in a community with the housing crisis?
Oh, I'm sure if any of the houses I've stayed at in Arizona probably were purchased.
But we don't even think about it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a cognitive thing. But if we care about that, like that should be a piece. So yeah, let's have abundant housing. Let's have people have Airbnbs if they want to. Awesome. Carry on. Do away with affordable housing. Yes to using available housing and abundant housing as terminology and philosophy.
I can get on board with that. And I also, as a real estate professional, have no issue. Like someone told me that every single year in any real estate adjacent piece of the market, we have a new job every year. And then the new job it's the same job. We do the same things for the most part with new compliance issues and new forms and this, that, and the other. But we have a different job every year. Like there's new variables every single year that impact how we have to operate. We have to adapt early on in the year. I have no issue as a real estate professional. I might get tomatoes thrown at me, but I have no issue with the concept of abundant housing.
Yeah.
I mean, we just would adjust to how that operates.
Right.
Maybe it takes longer to sell a house and it's easier for a buyer to buy a house. That's great. So we would just adjust.
Yeah.
That's the gray matter growing back in my brain because of the whiskey. That's the adaptability coming back. But anybody that's trying to like not let things happen organically, I think has other motives and other intentions. And I can speak for all of us here that like, if that's how it changed, then that's what we would do.
Yeah. Well, I can say as someone that gets to interact with a number of, real estate organizations, entities, agents all over this community, everybody's kind of on board, which is really interesting. And I think when I look at two partners of the chamber, so this is the Whatcom County Realtors Association or Association of Realtors and the BIA, which is very real estate adjacent, right? These two entities have been fighting for decades for adequate housing policy in our community. To some degree, both or some have been vilified in some circles. And one of the things that I'm always left with is I'm like, if you're a singular agent or singular real estate company, limited housing stock is good for you, right? You're going to sell that as much as your profit margin on that's going to go up because you're going to charge more for it. Now, you're not going to have the inventory for other things, so there's that piece to it. But functionally, you have these entities advocating against the best scenario in a short term for their constituents.
Right.
For the most part, most agents and, again, real estate entities that I've had the privilege and pleasure of working with are all in this, we need more housing. I'm super thankful that our city council right now, I feel, is finally hearing that. They're finally getting to the point where they're like, yeah, you know what, we probably need to increase housing. And that's great. And yes to abundant housing.
Yes. Well, first of all, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that other people are saying the same thing because
I think everybody has that same pain point. Like one of the things that, you know, when we talk about like what are the advocacy pieces that we engage with, and one of the other things that we've been pretty vocal or at least visible on is in childcare. Right, which is just really interesting. Like, why is the Chamber of Commerce getting engaged with childcare? I like to think of it as a dual investment, right? So we're getting parents back to work, really important in a workforce crisis. We need as many humans as possible. So let's get parents back to work. And then also good quality childhood, or especially early childhood education is just going to make us a better system in society 20, 30 years from now, right? From a chamber and a business perspective, like, yeah, let's build up the youngest of us so they're great employees in 20 years. It's a 20-year investment, right? And so that's one of those other pieces that really go into some of that advocacy work that maybe a little bit not standard for chambers to get engaged with.
got to get creative, though.
Well, we have a lot of, again, to your point, like we have some pain points and we get to solve. And childcare is this big nebulous thing. Again, there are other folks that you should bring on the show to talk about some of those pain points. I will probably get it wrong. So I'm just going to say childcare is important. We have to fix it. We probably have a lot of work over the next 10, 15 years to fix that. And I think there are metrics that we can lean in to measure whether we're doing it right. I know what those are, or at least I know what those are for me. And then the other big piece, and this is very much right now, I feel like housing has been a topic of advocacy for 10, 15 years. As, you know, childcare over the last probably 8 years or so, public safety is a really big issue right now. A lot of people saw our advocacy and partnership with the Downtown Bellingham Partnership with some of the downtown public safety advocacy that was done. So what about 2023? I guess is where a lot of that was. I just want to say special thanks to Mayor Kim Lund for making that a priority in her first few weeks in office. And we've actually seen a lot of that commitment come to fruition. And one of the things that I said at a gathering in downtown was, this is a great next step in solving this crisis. And we have a lot of other places in the community right now that we need attention. You know, I think there's a lot of conversation in the community about what is happening at Bakerview and Northwest, some of the encampments there. And I think part of us being competent, compassionate humans who live in community and want to create community is we need to understand what those pain points are. Is the encampment in of itself isn't a bad thing. Like, I don't think we should criminalize people being homeless.
Right.
We do need to address the criminality and the safety issues that are rampant, especially at that site. Have an interesting conversation, talk to some of the staff at like the Fred Meyer up there and some of our other retailers and some of our hoteliers in that area. That's the other piece that we've got to get right. And I think we can do both. I think we can lift people out of homelessness. We can provide services and care and adequate services and care for people and hold people accountable, right? Because if we're not going to hold people accountable for the rules that we create, why are we creating new rules all the time?
Yeah.
I think there's this level of community engagement that we need to further that pain point that's very now. And I think it's a very vocal and visual pain point as well.
Shifting gears, you're in Bellingham.
Yeah.
You've been here for a long time. What are some of your favorite elements of Bellingham? What makes Bellingham Bellingham?
Oh,
If you need to wet the whistle too, I'll do that too.
perfect.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers to good stuff.
Yeah. Tasty?
Yeah.
Like
it's
it?
bourbon. Yeah. Favorite things about Bellingham. I mean, first and foremost, my family's here, right? I don't think we've talked about it, but I like to tell everyone I was born, raised, educated, graduated in Southwest Louisiana. The same house I was born into, I graduated college from, right? So that would be like growing up in Whatcom County and being born into a house and graduating Western, and a month and a half after graduating Western, leaving.
Yeah.
I like to say my dad's first wife, and all of them were kind of based here. He used to live here in the 60s. He was one of the first employees out in Talco, which Alcoa we don't have anymore as an aluminum smelter. So a lot of legacy, a lot of history here, and I just wasn't born here, right?
Yeah.
And so moving up a year and a half after graduating college, family, right? A lot of my family is here, still here. I'm fortunate enough to have found a human that is now my family, and my wife and her family, which has adopted me. So family is a core tenet into who I am. Mm-hmm. And I think many of us share that. And so I would be remiss to not say that that is a core piece of why I love it here. The other piece, like, gosh, it's so hard to not mention how beautiful it is. Like, I like to tell everyone, as I've had the unique bias, own your bias, I've lived in the two most beautiful places in the country. You can't escape it here. Like, if I'm driving home up the guide every evening, I am surrounded by it. Like, you cannot not see it and not be in the natural beauty of this place. Back home, you had to get on a boat and go down a bayou in the middle of a, wetland area and just be completely consumed with humidity and bugs and wildlife, and it's almost an out-of-body experience being down there in that scenario, but not out of the boat, because there are things that will eat you. So yeah, I think the natural beauty, I often like framing it, Bellingham and Whatcom County is stuck between a rock and a wet place.
Yeah,
right?
That's good.
The benefits that come from that and some of the pain points, which we've mentioned, come from that. I think our unique location between Seattle and Vancouver is really valuable, both in what we have access to. My wife and a couple of our friends, we had an international date night. It was 25 minutes doorway to parking lot across the line the other day, right? Like, not everybody has that uniqueness, that close proximity to culture, right? And different cultures. Mm-hmm. And so I would be remiss to say that. I think I've 20 years having this deep engagement with a lot of the business community and just community at large. Like, that's kind of the uniqueness of being a chamber, right? You get to play with government, you get to play in business as a primary thing, but you also engage with community. Like, feeling that my fingerprints are on things. Right? It's kind of really interesting. And I don't have a whole lot of interest in legacy building, right? Like, I often think of my role, right, as president and CEO of the chamber. My role is to pass the baton to someone else down the line, right? Have an entity, have an organization that I do my best to build and promote and build better, and then pass the baton for someone else. Like, I was passed the baton. Right? Kind of like a long relay that we're 130 years into.
Yeah.
I don't need it to be about me, but I like the idea of giving enough time in a space to see things happen, right? And maybe a conversation, maybe a connection, built a business that sustained and created a space. And maybe that spark was at the chamber. And there's something really cool about that.
You get to be right in the middle of it.
At least on the edge.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Middle edge?
Middle edge, sure.
Yeah. Okay, middle edge. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, hey, episode 5, Guy.
However it comes out.
Occhiogrosso.
Exactly. But what's interesting about that, right? The name's clearly Italian.
Yeah.
But I grew up in Louisiana. My mom didn't speak English until she was 5 years old. And so that, like, French, that Cajun French piece,
yeah,
I probably recognize probably impacts me so much more than my Italian heritage. So it's just interesting, right? You go
Nature versus nurture.
something like
A whole
that.
other episode.
Whole nother episode.
Well, I'm right there with you because I'm sure I butcher my own last name because there's an H in the middle, but I don't say Cohen. I say Cohen.
English is fun.
Ooh, it is fun.
Yeah, it is.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for your incredible team for being behind the scenes to support it. And again, I want a special shout out to somebody.
Taylor.
One of the, which I guess you were too, the year before. Top 7 under 40.
I was.
And so
Someone slipped my name in a hat.
hey, there you go.
I don't know why.
It's what it takes.
But you know what's interesting about that is it almost felt like it was like a prelude to something better, which was her. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. I'm honored to be a part of
think
it. But then Taylor got it, and I was like, but this makes so much more sense.
I think both made sense because that's the nature of a recognition program, right? And there's some folks out there that are like, why do you do award ceremonies and top 7 under 40? Is because it's building community, right? Giving people something to hang on their wall or put on their resume, sure. But it's saying thank you. It's saying you're valuable and you're important and you do a great job. And
Taylor, you are very important and very valuable.
yes, she is.
Yeah.
And thanks for letting her serve on the advisory council for Whatcom County Professionals.
Absolutely.
So,
Well-
empowering her, not letting her.
Yeah. Well, she would have done it either way. So,
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers. We're out.
Building Bellingham is a community podcast produced by the Bellingham Real Estate Company. Our producers and audio editors are Taylor Beal and Tiffany Holden. Social media and video production are by Cooper Hansley and Taylor Beal.